Shalom, shalom. Welcome to our channel, your Able Code channel, where we are once again publishing a class from this free Mishna course, which is nothing more and nothing less than the key to understanding the biblical text. It is the context we must understand to truly understand the scriptures and decode the message they have for us. Today we begin a new chapter, the fourth of the first tractate of the Mishnah known as Berakhot or Blessings. We have been studying everything related to the recitation of the Shema, which is the most important commandment in the entire Torah, along with you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is Abel Flores, and without further ado, let us begin. So, starting with our class today, as usual, we read the teaching we are dealing with today, which is located in Berakhot chapter 4, Mishnah 1, which reads as follows: the morning prayer, Shacharit, may be said until noon. Rabbi Yehudah says, up to 4 hours of the day. The afternoon prayer, Mincha, may be said until night. Rabbi Yehudah says, until Pelag HaMincha. The evening prayer, Arvit, has no time limit and may be said throughout the night. The additional prayer, Musaf, may be said throughout the day. Rabbi Yehudah says, up to 7 hours of the day. Well, as we have just read, this Mishnah determines the times beyond which the different prayers may not be recited. According to the Tannidic rabbis, that is, those of the Mishnah's time, the morning prayer may be recited until noon. Rabbi Yehudah says, it may be recited only up to 4 hours after sunrise. According to the rabbis, the afternoon prayer may be recited until nightfall. Rabbi Yehudah says, it may be recited only until mid-afternoon, that is, halfway through the period that begins with the sacrifice of the daily afternoon offering and ends at dusk, which is the end of the afternoon. The afternoon prayer may be recited throughout the night and is not fixed to a specific time. According to the rabbis, the additional prayer may be recited all day. Rabbi Yehudah says, it may be recited only up to 7 hours after sunrise. Here we are no longer talking about the Shema. Here we are talking about the Amidah, or the Shemini Esrei, which is the most important prayer in Judaism. It is prayed 3 times a day, once in the morning, which in Hebrew is called Shacharit, a second time in the afternoon, which in Hebrew is called Mincha, and a third and final time at night, which in Hebrew is called Arvit. Basically, this study of this Mishnah in Berakhot 4.1 relates to the times of prayer. The Mishnah establishes the time limits for the 4 daily prayers, Shacharit, Mincha, Arvit, and Musaf. It summarizes 2 positions, that of the Shachamim, the sages, and that of Rabbi Yehudah. But here it is worth asking what the Talmud says. Why do these times exist? The Talmud, in Berakhot 26a and b, discusses 2 foundations. Avat Tiknum, prayers were instituted by the patriarchs, Abraham, Shacharit, Itzhak, Mincha Yaakov, Arvit. And Kanijt Korbanot, prayers correspond to the daily temple sacrifices, morning and afternoon Tamid, nighttime burning of fats, Musaf sacrifices. This anchor explains the time limits. These 2 logics coexist. Halakhic practice of time is based primarily on the correlation with the korbanot, or sacrifices made in the temple. The halakhic clock has 2 essential technical definitions during the Second Temple period and, consequently, during the Mishnah. Halakhic hour, Sha'es manit 1 hour among 12 daylight hours. There are 2 main counting systems, GRA from sunrise to sunset. And the second definition is known as Magen Avraham, from the Elot HaShakar, which in Hebrew means from the breaking of dawn, to Tzait HaKachavim, which means the rising of the stars. At least 3 stars indicates this concept. These 2 models alter all time intervals, i.e., the 4th hour, the 7th hour, the 9th hour. So you must understand that in Judaism from the time of the Mishnah, and this stems from the customs of the Second Temple, there are 2 ways, 2 systems for counting time. I repeat, the GRA system, which has 12 hours from sunrise to sunset, and the Magen Avraham system, which runs from the break of dawn to the appearance of 3 stars. There is also another topic we must study today, and it is called in Hebrew Chatzot Hayom, or halakhic midday, which is the exact middle of the day. That is, in a reckoning of 12 hours in a day, the 6th hour is Chatzot Hayom. We must also understand that there are 2 kinds of evening in Judaism. Mincha Gedola, or greater evening, and Mincha Katana, or lesser evening. Mincha Gedola, or greater evening, begins early at 6:30 a.m. from sunrise and marks the beginning of evening from the middle of the day. It is called greater evening because there are still many hours until nightfall. However, lesser evening, or Mincha Katana, means when the 9th hour has passed since sunrise and there are less than 3 hours left until nightfall. But what's the point of all this? The Korban Tamid, or continuous sacrifice, that was performed in the temple every evening. Now, what's going on here in the Mishnah between the sages Shacharit and Rabbi Yehudah? Why do they have a different opinion? In the Shacharit, or morning prayer, the Mishnah says that the Amidah can be performed until noon, as Shacharit say, but Rabbi Yehudah says until the 4th hour, that is, if sunrise is at 6 a.m., the 4th hour from sunrise is at 10 a.m., for hours later. That is what Rabbi Yehudah says. In other words, Rabbi Yehudah is stricter here. And we return to the same interpretation we already know in this course because it is one of the foundations of the Mishnah, the authority of the Torah or Diareta, and the authority of the rabbis, which is Rabbanan. The sages say that you have until the middle of the day, Chatzot Hayom, to pray Shacharit according to the Torah limit, but Rabbi Yehudah says until the 4th hour, that is, 2 hours less, to keep a fence around the Torah so you don't forget to pray or get too late and miss the hour. So what happens if you miss the time? You can pray until Chatzot with observance, but outside of its time, you lost the reward of praying at its time. This is codified by the Rif and by Rambam Maimonides. It is also the norm that has dominated Judaism since the 16th century in Shulchan Aruch Chaim 89:1. Now, let's study the afternoon prayer, or Mincha. The Mishnah says until nightfall, according to Shacharit, but Rabbi Yehudah says until Pelag HaMincha. The Amidah can then be said from Mincha Gedola, or 6.5 hours after sunrise, or preferably from Mincha Katana, which is 9.5 hours after sunrise. What does the Hebrew word Pelag mean? It is 1 hour and a quarter before the end of the day, and it marks, in Rabbi Yehudah's opinion, the close of Mincha and the possible beginning of Arvit, the night prayer. There is a key practical rule here. One does not mix opinions on the same day. That is, one does not pray Mincha after Pelag and Arvit before night, post-Pelag, on the same day. Either one acts that day like Rabbi Yehudah, Mincha before Pelag and Arvit after Pelag, or like the Shacharit, Mincha until night and Arvit after tzait. This is how it is codified in the Shulchan Aruch Chaim 233 and later poskim in the Middle Ages. Either you are in one system or you are in the other, but without mixing. You have to understand something very basic here, and it's the real reason for the two systems. The GRA with 12 hours and the Magen Abraham. It's as simple as when you're in a country or a place where the night and day each last 12 hours, then it's easy to divide the night into 12 hours and the day into 12 hours. But what happens when you're in a country in the northern hemisphere where there are harsh winters? Then you have to use the Magen Abraham system, which basically divides the hours by 12, but the night hours will be longer than the day hours because the days are shorter. Anyone who lives in countries where winters occur will easily notice this, but those who live near the equator notice it much less because the lengths of the day and night are similar. Rabbi Yehudah, the writer and editor of the Mishnah, placed a fence around the Torah in his generation of praying Shacharit in the morning until the quarter hour and Mincha until an hour and a quarter before sunset. Because precisely in the time of Rabbi Yehudah, they were already in the diaspora, there was no longer a temple, and many surviving communities of Jews began to live in countries north of Israel, where the seasons were different. Rabbi Yehudah decreed a protective fence so that Jews would not pray late and lose the merit of praying because in the new conditions of the diaspora the time was different because they were in a different region. So, what about the night prayer or Arvit? The Mishnah says that it has no fixed time Yain Lakiva. The Talmud immediately debates whether Arvit is recited, optional, or chova, obligatory, a famous dispute between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. The accepted practice is to treat it as obligatory for those who regularly adopt it. And the fourth recitation discussed in this Mishnah is the Musaf, which means additional, and relates to the additional sacrifices made in the temple on Shabbat and other holidays, which are additional prayers added to the Amidah on those days as a correlation with the temple korbanot. Regarding this, the Mishnah says that the Musaf may be recited all day, but Rabbi Yehudah, up to 7 hours from sunrise. The explanation is basically the same as we stated above. In Rabbi Yehudah's generation, most communities were outside of Israel, with a different time zone. In the codification of the Shulchan Aruch, Arachim 286, it is stated that the ideal of Musaf is immediately after Shacharit and before the end of the 7th hour, and whoever delays it is called a sinner pashia, although he or she will fulfill it if he or she does so later, as long as it is within the same day. Failure to recite the Amidah on its own day has no tashluminite, i.e., it cannot be made up the next day. A prayer not recited on its proper day is like a lost prayer, non-existent and unrecoverable. Regarding tashlumina, or making up a missed Amidah, the Gemara in Berakhot 26a and b teaches that one who missed a prayer may make it up by saying 2 Amidat in the next prayer period. For example, if he missed Mincha, he prays 2 in Arvit, the first in Arvit, the second in Mincha, but this refers to missing one of the prayers on the same day, not the next day. This is codified in Arachim 108. However, there is no tashlumina for Musaf. Now, we must study the Korban Tamid, or the continuous sacrifice that was made in the temple by command of Moses since the time of the tabernacle in the desert, and, above all, understand or know the times of the Korban Tamid. So, what is the Korban Tamid? The Korban Tamid means continual or constant offering. It was a mandatory daily sacrifice in the Temple of Jerusalem, described in Exodus 29 verses 38 to 42 and Numbers 28:1-8. 2 male lambs without blemish were offered each day, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. The Tamid was the liturgical foundation upon which the other offerings and the daily priestly routine of the Kohanim were based. The sages consider it the most constant and priority sacrifice in the entire temple system. Its biblical sources are as follows. Exodus chapter 29 verses 38 to 39. Now this is what you shall offer on the altar. 2 lambs a year old each day continually. 1 lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. And the second source is Numbers chapter 28 verses 3 to 4, where the command is repeated. This is the continual burnt offering, 1 lamb in the morning and 1 lamb between the 2 evenings, bin harbeim. These sources establish both the quantity and the timing of the offering, and here we see a hint of the greater evening, or Mincha Gedola, and the lesser evening, or Mincha Katana. That is, what Rabbi Yehudah says in the Mishnah we are studying has its origins in Moses. Each of the 2 lambs was accompanied by a grain offering, mincha 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil, a wine libation, nesikim 1/4 of a hin of wine. Thus, a complete sacrifice was offered with meat, grain, and wine. Its biblical sources are as follows. Exodus chapter 29 verses 38 to 39. Now this is what you shall offer on the altar. 2 lambs a year old each day, continually. 1 lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. And the second source is Numbers chapter 28 verses 3 to 4, where the command is repeated. This is the continual burnt offering, 1 lamb in the morning and 1 lamb between the 2 evenings, bin harbeim. These sources establish both the quantity and the timing of the offering, and here we see a hint of the greater evening, or Mincha Gedola, and the lesser evening, or Mincha Katana. That is, what Rabbi Yehudah says in the Mishnah we are studying has its origins in Moses. Each of the 2 lambs was accompanied by a grain offering, mincha 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil, a wine libation, nesikim 1/4 of a hin of wine. Thus, a complete sacrifice was offered with meat, grain, and wine. Rediasporic, but it is even older because it dates back to the time of the patriarchs, which is why it is called the shield of Abraham. They are simply 2 different ways of counting time, but both are valid. This is why tefillah, or prayer, is based on 2 things, the prayers of the patriarchs and the continuous sacrifice in the temple. In the end, it's the same, but with two different calculations of the hours of the day, because one has a temple and the other does not. The Mishnah Pesachim 5:1 and the Mishnah Tamid 4:1 stipulate, on an ordinary day, the sacrifice was made at 8:30 in the morning and offered at 9:30 in the afternoon. On Passover Eve, when the Paschal lamb was to be prepared, the sacrifice was made 1 hour earlier, sacrifice at 7:30, offering at 8:30. It was always the last sacrifice of the day. Yain davar kodem, l'tamid shel bien har beim, nothing is offered after the evening tamid. The only subsequent offerings were the pieces of fat and organs that could be consumed on the altar during the night. That's why Rabbi Yehudah says that the Korban Tamid, or Mincha prayer, must be performed an hour and a quarter before sunset. Since the afternoon Korban Tamid was the last sacrifice made in the temple each day, other sacrifices had to be made beforehand, of course, depending on the day. Another key to understanding that the method Rabbi Yehudah uses is the Magen Abraham method, or the diasporic method, or without a temple method. This is because it uses hours with minutes, an hour and a quarter. This is because the 12 hours of the day are different from the 12 hours of the night, so they are divided by 12, but each hour doesn't equal 60 minutes. In fact, this is the system we use to this day, that of Rabbi Yehudah, which is the same as the system of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the diasporic method. Now, the sages derived from these sacrificial times the time slots for afternoon prayer, Mincha Gadola, begins at 6:05 a.m., when it is already permissible to sacrifice the evening tamid in special cases. Mincha Ketana begins at 9:05 a.m., the normal time for evening tamid. And Pelag HaMincha is 1 hour and 15 minutes before sunset, the cutoff point according to Rabbi Yehudah for ending Mincha and permitting Arvit. Thus, Mishnah Berakhot 4.1 is directly anchored in the times of the Korban Tamid. Remember that the Tamid had absolute priority over voluntary offerings, and by citing it in the Mishnah, what it is saying is that the Shacharit and Mincha prayers are obligatory and take priority over anything else in the daily routine. In the temple, no sacrifice could be offered before the morning Tamid or after the evening Tamid. This principle was also reflected in the liturgy. The tefillot of Shacharit and Mincha occupy a fixed place, and Arvit, associated with the nightly burning of fats, is without fixed limit. The hours of the temple were Sha'ot maniat. They are calculated by dividing daylight, dawn to dusk, into 12 equal parts. Thus, the 8:5 hour falls approximately 2.5 hours before dusk in summer, but it can vary with the season and latitude. This reckoning explains the variability in Jewish calendars regarding zmanim, or times, because everything depends on the time zone you are in. Commentators, such as Nachmanides and Sforno, see the Korban Tamid as a symbol of continuity, a daily renewal of the covenant between Israel and God. Its constancy marked the rhythm of the divine service. After the destruction of the temple, daily prayer complemented its function, but it did not replace the sacrifices, which is why Shacharit and Mincha are obligatory. What this means is that the reason there are no sacrifices today is because there is no temple, but if there were a temple, then there would be sacrifices, and in both cases, with or without a temple, the Amidah should still be prayed 3 times a day. Never forget this, because prayer is the commandment of Moses that says, avoda of the heart, it is a mitzvah of the Torah. So, the conclusion about the Korban Tamid is that it was the backbone of temple worship. It was offered twice a day, with strict timings and priority over any other offering. Their schedules shaped the current structure of daily prayers and the halakhic divisions of the prayer day, and understanding their chronology is key to understanding why Mishnah Berakhot 4.1 sets the boundaries of Shacharit, Mincha, and Musaf. You must understand that the Korban Tamid was not simply another sacrifice. It was the pacemaker of the temple, just as today prayer is the foundation of the synagogue service, which is a small temple. The Korban Tamid was offered every day of the year, including Shabbat and festivals, without exception. That is why it is called Tamid, continuous or permanent. In fact, the Hebrew word Tamid means always or perpetual. It represented the constancy of the bond between Israel and God. The sages, Midrash Tanchuma, Pinchas 13, say that as long as the Tamid is offered, the world is sustained. It was considered the public sacrifice par excellence, financed by the annual half-shekel contribution from all of Israel. But it is worth asking, did the Korban Tamid atone for sins? The Tamid was neither a Korban Sha'ot, sin offering, nor an Ashem, individual guilt, so it did not atone for specific personal sins. However, because it was a daily collective holocaust, Ola, it had a general kapara effect. It maintained the constant atmosphere of atonement for the people, covering minor involuntary transgressions until each individual performed teshuvah. What did it protect? According to Sifra Bamidbar and Talmud Menachot 110a, the constancy of the Tamid was a spiritual shield for the nation. For Israel, it ensured that the remaining korbanot, voluntary, Musaf, the Sach, and all others, were accepted and maintained the daily merit of the people. The Korban Tamid was a collective providence, or Haskacha Chloe. The Korban Tamid was so important that it was believed that if it ceased, the channel of spiritual protection and blessing for Israel would be weakened. That is why the prophet Daniel alludes to the Tamid removed as a spiritual catastrophe prior to the desolation of the sanctuary. Let us read the following in the prophet Daniel. Daniel 8 verses 11 to 13. Yet he magnified himself against the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And because of his transgression, the host was delivered to him along with the daily sacrifice, and he cast down truth to the ground, and did whatever he pleased, and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another of the holy ones asked him who is speaking, how long will the vision of the daily sacrifice continue, and the transgression of desolation, giving over both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And Daniel 11 verse 31 says, and forces will arise from him and defile the sanctuary and the fortress, and will take away the daily sacrifice, and set up the abomination of desolation. And Daniel 12 verse 11 adds, from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Well, here we see biblical proof from a prophet like Daniel about the danger of ceasing to do so. The interruption of the Tamid symbolized the breaking of the covenant and the end of the Shekinah, or divine presence, in the temple. Historically, during sieges of Jerusalem, when animals or priests were lacking, the Tamid was interrupted. The Talmud, Tayanaiti 28b, and Josephus, Jewish War 694, relate that the suspension of the daily sacrifice marked the beginning of the end of the Second Temple. In the words of the Kabbalist Rabbi Nachmanides in his commentary on Numbers 28:2, he says, like the minister in the royal court who greets the king every day, the Tamid is Israel's daily offering to its sovereign. The nature of the sacrifice was a holocaust, Ola. The Tamid was a complete Ola, that is, the entire animal was burned on the altar. No portion was eaten. It included a Mincha, an offering of flour and oil, and a libation of wine. It was, therefore, a total holocaust and not a peace offering, Shalomim, or a sin offering, Chadat. It was a national covenant, not an individual one. The detailed procedure was as follows. According to the Mishnah Tamid, chapters 1-5, and Ramban Maimonides also explains it in Hilchot Tamidin Amashafin 1-3. At dawn, the Kohanim cast lots for the tasks, cleansing the altar. Sacrifice, incense offering. The altar was cleansed, Teramat Haichin, and the fire was lit. For the morning sacrifice, a year-old lamb without blemish was brought. Its slaughter was carried out north of the altar. The blood was collected and sprinkled on 2 diagonal corners of the altar, which covered all 4 walls. It was skinned and divided into members. The Mincha and libation were prepared. Everything was placed on the altar and lit. And for the evening sacrifice, which was the second, the same procedure was carried out, but in the late afternoon. This Tamid closed the altar. Afterward, all that remained was to burn the fats and organs during the night. That is to say, when you read or hear about the fats being burned on the altar at night, we are speaking exclusively of the Korban Tamid, because it was the last sacrifice of the temple service each day. This order created a daily bridge of fire and smoke that united morning and evening. And that is why Rabban Gamliel, in previous Mishnah, cites the burning of the fats of this korban Tamid throughout the night as proof that the Torah authorizes reading the night Shema all night until sunrise with dawn. The secrets and symbolisms in rabbinic and mystical tradition regarding the korban Tamid, constancy of faith, 2 lambs daily as 2 pulses that mark spiritual life. Double love. According to the Zohar, Pinchas 2:19a, morning represents manifest love, she said, and evening, softened judgment, Gevura. The Tamid balances both forces like a Tiferet. Crowdfunding. Purchases were made with common funds so that everyone could share the merit, the ultimate expression of Arvit, mutual responsibility, because this was the purpose of the half shekel given by the children of Israel when they took the census. Every adult male over the age of 20 donated half a shekel to the temple. This money was used to pay for the korban Tamid each year. The prefiguration of tefillah today with the Amidah as the main prayer makes Shacharit and Mincha direct heirs to the temple Tamid, but Arvit corresponds to the nightly burning of organs and fats. The korban Tamid was the continuous, collective, and total sacrifice, a symbol of a permanent commitment between Israel and God. Although it did not replace individual atoning sacrifices, it acted as a spiritual shield and guarantee of divine acceptance. Its interruption was experienced as a sign of spiritual disaster. With the destruction of the temple, daily prayer inherited its role as a constant service. Tefillah with the Amidah does not replace the sacrifices. It complements them, because even with the temple standing and the korban Tamid in operation, we must all continue praying, as indeed was the case when the temple was standing. At that time when there was a korban Tamid, the sages and the Shachamim, everyone prayed and recited the Amidah 3 times a day. It's not a substitution, it's a complement, because in the end, they're 2 different commandments. That's it for today's class. Until the next video.